Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Welcome to My World. I am Dr. Kristen of Abbey Research. And if you have stumbled upon this YouTube series and don't know what it is, essentially, I spend a little bit of time every week asking someone who isn't me questions about their lives and their passions or something else. And it's just a little short peek into someone else's world in order to build empathy and just to know folks. And today with me, I have Will Hinson, who is in the IT department at the University of Pittsburgh and is somebody who has taught me tons and tons about 3D printing. But why he is here today is because he happens to be Dr. Hinson's brother, and he also happens to be very knowledgeable and into gaming. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is Japanese gaming in particular. So Will, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
An absolute delight. So beyond the fact that I know Japan invented Nintendo, I know
Could put it that way, sure.
Very little else. So help me kind of understand what gaming is in specificity to Japanese gaming.
So it is kind of interesting because we think of them as having invented games, video games in particular. But there was a lot of cross-pollination between Japan and the rest of the West while computers were being developed. Because originally, nobody made gaming consoles. People just made computers. So you think back to the original, the Amiga, the Commodore 64, the Apple IIe. Those are really where gaming started. But Nintendo in Japan is famous for having made the most successful first console ever, and that was the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. So there's a very large culture of gaming in Japan, and it's a little bit different from the way we think of gaming in America or the rest of the West, mostly because being a like gamer, geek, or a nerd, or however you want to call yourself or phrase it, is not, or was not at least necessarily as stigmatized as it was in the West here until very recently, let's say. You think back in popular culture, being a geek and being a nerd has only sort of been popular in America for a relatively short period of time. Anybody who grew up in the 90s knows that you were not popular if you were a geek back then.
I mean, that's the whole premise of Big Bang Theory, really, in a way.
Right.
So, yeah.
So it took us a while to catch up, but the word that they use in Japan is otaku, and you might have heard that somewhere else before. It's a very commonly understood phrase, but that basically translates to like super geek or super nerd, somebody who's really, really into, it doesn't have to be gaming. It can be any particular otaku, and there are train otakus, there are music otakus, but that sort of acceptance of like obsession.
Like hyperfixation on in a fandom in some way.
Yeah, it's more integrated over there, at least a little bit. And so gaming, which was initially and is still sort of viewed as a sort of geek hobby, was treated more seriously than it was necessarily here. In America, we tend to think of games as being like sort of fun, casual, like releases. It's a way to escape. It's like watching TV, binging Netflix, whatever. But the scene in Japan developed a little bit more seriously, which is why their games have sort of been known more for difficulty. We'll put it that way. Because if you think this is actually one of my favorite stories, everybody knows Super Mario Brothers, right?
Yes.
Super Mario Brothers, huge smash hit on the Nintendo. Super Mario Brothers 2 in America is a completely different game from Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan.
Really?
And yes, it's because they made Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan, and the people who were responsible for bringing games over to America were afraid that it was too difficult for American audiences. So they took a completely different game that had not been finished yet, put Mario, Luigi, Princess, and Toad in it, and called that Super Mario Brothers 2 and released that in America. And the original Super Mario Brothers 2 that was released in Japan was then retitled Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels.
Okay.
And we got that over here as well eventually. And that's why Super Mario Brothers 2 is such a weird outlier, is because the original version of 2, people were afraid that American audiences would not enjoy that as much.
Especially because I think that NES, like when you're a little bit older than I am, but not much. So we're in the same generational band. Like video games was still like a kid thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's not as much anymore. We have much more. I mean, it's still stigmatized. It's still, we still make the jokes about people living in their parents' basement. We still have all that stuff. But I think my memory of it coming out, especially with Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers, was that this was a kid's thing, that if adults did it, it would, like, they better have a kid in their lives in a way.
Yes, and it was very heavily marketed towards children in America as well.
But not in Japan.
I can't speak exactly to
Okay.
how it was necessarily treated over there. At least during that period.
Right.
In America, there was also heavy cross promotion with things like Saturday morning cartoons, which helped to further, like you said, make that link between it being like a kid's thing and not necessarily for grown-ups. But then, all those kids grew up, and now we're the grown-ups, and we still play video games.
And so was your introduction to gaming Nintendo, or was it like, were you in the Atari phase as well?
I was in the, oh boy, the very first computer that our family ever got was an IBM PC Junior, which was famous for being terrible.
Got it. Okay.
When we got it, the first thing that Mom put on it, programmed into it, was Math Rabbit, and that was a game.
I remember Math Rabbit. I had Math Blaster too, which was one of my favorites.
Yeah. So like that was my first quote unquote game.
Okay.
Was educational. And then, we had the computer labs in school.
Oregon Trail.
Absolutely. Before we ever had, before having a computer at home was considered normal.
Yeah.
Right. So that was that whole period. But then, eventually I actually got a Game Boy before I got a Nintendo.
Okay. Me too, actually. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which was weird because then all of the games that I played on the Game Boy version, I could suddenly play on the TV, and it was a very different experience.
Very, yeah.
Yeah. So that would be the first one. And then, over time, it's just one of those things where I never felt like I needed to give it up.
Okay.
Where a lot, sometimes people with childhood hobbies, whatever they like to do as a kid, they think, oh, this is a kid's thing. Now I have to sort of leave it behind. I'm a grown-up person. You enter the adult world, you leave that stuff. But gaming continued to evolve.
Yeah.
It didn't stay at the super fun Super Mario Brothers platformer level. It's a larger industry now than movies in terms of gross product. So.
And the amount of people it takes to make a game is absolutely the same amount of people that it takes to make a Marvel movie. And that is, so I don't know if I've actually ever said this on this channel, but my husband worked in video games for a while. He was in the quality assurance side of things, and he actually worked on internationalization and did making sure that the game made in English still made sense in German and in Polish and in Russian and in things like that. And I had no idea how many people it took to make anything until I met him, and he made me watch the whole credits of BioShock, and I was like, oh my gracious. So it was, and he should have, because I needed that correction. So it absolutely has grown, and there's so many different categories of games, and you and I have talked, we'll talk again in another video about kind of like online communal games and how that has affected. But to return a little bit to the differences between Japanese gaming and American, has the seriousness, continued? Is that still a cultural value to your knowledge?
Yes. And the place that you can see this most clearly, and it's kind of very broad in Southeast Asia in general, but very specifically, fighting games and the sort of outgrowth of those MOBAs, multiplayer online battle arenas like Dota, Dota 2. If you've never heard of those, they are esports on the level that regular sports are here in America.
Right. And we're even doing scholarships to college for esports now.
We're doing scholarships. We are building arenas where people play video games for massive audiences. And that's been a thing that's been established in Japan and specifically also South Korea for a little while now. The fighting game tournaments in particular have been huge over there. If you think like Street Fighter, that's another one that, you know, people are generally sort of familiar with. Mortal Kombat, things like that.
Yeah, the stuff that was in pizza places when we were all growing up, I think is.
Yeah, kind of. That competitive scene was always more competitive in Japan than it was necessarily here.
Okay.
And you know, that's just continued on the same trajectory.
So explain for me and our audience as well, like, what do you mean when it's like a spectator sport? Like, so someone's sitting in a chair and playing a game and everything's on a screen? Do people like pick their favorite player and it turns into that kind of like that kind of okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it as an organized team sport, let's stick with Dota 2 because the international is, I think, still the largest.
And I'm sorry, what word are you saying?
So the game is called Dota, D-O-T-A.
Dota, okay.
2 specifically, that's the newest version.
Okay, great.
And they have a tournament called the International every year.
Okay.
And the prize pool for that is millions of dollars.
Okay, amazing. Okay.
Split between the winning teams. And it's a 5v5. So there's 2 teams of 5 people each. And they compete to complete objectives on a map. They work together cooperatively, and the matches can take, you know, anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, depending on how well it's going. And it is extremely high level play. It's the same difference between, you know, watching a bunch of kids kick a ball in a field and watching a professional football or soccer match.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get through a level of The Witcher without dying, so that's definitely not my scene. But that's amazing. And as somebody who can't get through a level of The Witcher without dying, sometimes I am incredibly impressed. So yeah, that's a lot of skill.
It is a lot of skill. They, you know, teams live together in houses and practice for, you know, 8-10 hours a day.
Okay.
Getting ready for these competitions. They're sponsored. They all wear like team jerseys and uniforms. It is a full-fledged sport.
Okay. And and essentially like that culture started in like Japan and South Korea and those places. Okay.
And it's been coming to America more. We generally in international terms, America hasn't really been necessarily competitive, but we have such a large pool of people relative to some of the other smaller countries that we are still sort of building that up. But it's the kind of thing where, you know, like a sport, you start as a kid and you play for your life to get to where people are competing at an international level.
That's fascinating. And one of the ways that people watch this stuff is the streaming service Twitch, correct? Is there a specialized one for these teams, or is everything happening on Twitch?
To my knowledge, pretty much everything happens on Twitch.
Okay.
The companies that put on these tournaments, you know, we'll have professional hosts who discuss the matches, talk to the players, you know, in between, and then cut to the actual events.
Okay.
And you know, in the before times, they would take place in an arena where thousands of people were sitting and watching as well.
It's incredible. The communal aspect of this thing that we in the West often talk about as something that people do entirely alone. Is something that I think we'll be exploring more on this channel for sure, but also social scientists in general need to be talking about it more. And we've talked about this offline, and I know Dr. Aaron and I have too, of our real pet peeve at the idea that online friendships aren't real. And that really, truly, these relationships are built through these experiences, no matter if you're in person or not. And that's really important. This is
For
also
sure.
fascinating. So I'm going to wrap up really quickly this piece of our conversation though, with so somebody's watching this and they've never played a video game and they don't really understand this world at all. Is there any kind of one thing that you would want them to know about why gaming is important?
That's an interesting question. I would just encourage people to think of it the same way that you might think of like other hobbies that we've had around forever, but we think of as more traditional. A good one is something like fly fishing. Really not for everybody. Can be done very casually. But there are people who absolutely love it and dedicate their lives to it as well. And so it's, like we say about everything, it's a spectrum. And some people are just going to be super into it, and some people are just going to engage with it in a very casual manner. And there's nothing wrong with either of those things. So just keep that in mind for if you're thinking of this as it's only casual. I promise there's nothing in human experience that is only ever casual for every single person.
That is such a truism and a great place to end. So, Will, thank you so much for joining me again, and we'll see you again soon for more conversation about gaming and community.
Sounds awesome. Looking forward to it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.